Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava Batra Daf Kuf Bav. Today's stuff is sponsored by Heather Stone in loving memory of her mother, Ellie Stone, Esther being about Rachel Leah Avraham Alevi on her 13th year at site. She was always a strong and fierce advocate for the Jewish community. Today's stuff is sponsored by the Hadran Zoom family for Refuah Shlema to the grandson of our dear friend Becky, Eitan Ephraim Ben Ayelet, who was wounded in Gaza on Monday, and a tefillah for all the soldiers. Mishabarach Avotenu Yivarech et Chayalei Israel, שישלח לו רפואה שלמה בגוף ובנפש בתוך שאר חולי Israel. Amen. Okay, we're going to get started now with our Mishnah. So we had someone who sells a bait core and says the words midah bechevel, exact measurements. Said no margin of error here. Any minor change gets returned. We had sells a bait core and says O pachot o yetel, or if I'm getting the words exactly right, but hein chaser, hein yetel, whether it's a little more, whether it's a little less. What's our margin of error? We assume 1/24, right? Rova kav per se'ah. That was 1/24. And look back at the images from 2 days ago, the pictures, and you can remember how we got that. Now, we have a new case. And the assumption, certainly of the Rashbam and the other commentaries, is even though it doesn't say a beit kor afar, it's the same thing. You said, I'm giving you a certain measurement of a field. Again, it doesn't have to be a beit kor. They're just bringing that as an example. Bisimanav ubemibtzarav. Okay, that's how the Mishnah starts. It doesn't tell you a beit kor anymore, but the assumption, otherwise it doesn't make any sense, has to be that there was a certain size field that was specified. And then you added the words, you didn't say midah b'chevel, you didn't say hein chaser, hein yeter. You said bisimanav ubemitzarav. Here are the borders and the demarcations of this field. And presumably, some of the commentaries say you showed, you pointed out, you said, I'm giving you this field from here to there. Now, this is a little bit different than the other cases. And why this is a little different? Well, perhaps because you were shown the field and you knew exactly what you were getting. Or perhaps some people say this wording means I'm selling it as is. In other words, by saying, hein chaser, hein yeter, I'm saying I know there'll be a little bit of error. By saying midah bechevel, I'm saying exactly. And by saying b'simanav u'mitzarav, I'm basically saying, and here it is, and basically this is what you're getting, whether you like it, whether it ends up being the exact size I said or not. So because of that, either because you showed the person the field and they kind of accepted it, or because this wording really means you get this as is, there has to be a much bigger range of error for you to be able to say we have to fix this, because we assume that the sale is a good sale for whatever it is, even if it doesn't exactly match the size. So instead of 1/24, it's going to be, we're going to see a 6. Okay? Pachot mishtut higio ad shtut yinakeh. If the discrepancy in the size of the beit core of this field that we demarcated is less than 1/6 of a difference of the size, then we leave it. Okay, if you didn't get a 6, it was down to a 6 difference than what you said you were going to get. It was a 6 less than the beit core. Then the seller says, sorry, tough luck, this is what you get. And if it's less than a 6 more, the seller can't claim, oh, I gave you too much, we measured it wrong, and I want it back. But ad shtut, now ad doesn't mean until, it's a little bit of a weird use here, but until meaning anything more than a 6, like a fifth, a quarter, anything like that, yinakeh. Then already you have to fix it because that's a big difference. Even though you said take it as is, well, you didn't mean if we were really off by that much. Notice what's missing in the Mishnah. It says, now, first I want to point out one thing before we even get to that, which is the 6th we know from laws of ona'ah. But the commentaries say, don't get confused. This isn't ona'ah. This happens to be the same ratio, the same fraction. But it's not because of laws of ona'ah. Why is that? We all know, right? There's no laws of ona'ah for land. Ona'ah is, right, if somebody charges, overcharges, undercharges. But why do I want to mention this now? Because in ona'ah, if you remember, we discussed what happens under a 6, what happens over a 6, but then there was also what happens at a 6, exactly. What if it's exactly a 6? And our Mishnah doesn't say that. Our Mishnah talks about a smaller than a 6 difference, a larger than a 6 difference, but doesn't say what if it's exactly differs by a 6. So that's going to be the whole issue on Amud Aleph, okay, which is Itmar. So the Gemara starts off, mentioning a machloket about specifically this issue. And this comes up all the time when we say things, right? It's until, right, age 15. Okay, you can get in for free up till age 12. This actually just happened somewhere I'm trying to remember, where they said, right, it says until age whatever. And then they said, well, it doesn't include that age, right? It's up until that age, not beyond. I wish I could remember what it was, but this happens all the time. So they say, what if it's exactly at a 6? Itma. Rav Huna amar, shtut kepachat mishtut. Rav Yehuda amar, shtut kiyoter mishtut. Okay, we have the obvious machloket. Rav Huna says, shtut is like less than a shtut. If it's still a sixth of difference, that's okay. We're going to let it go. Rav Yehuda says, no, shtut is like more than a sixth. Okay, if you get to a sixth, it's like more than a sixth, and you have to start either cutting off land or paying the difference and working out the issue. So now we're going to read how each one reads the Mishnah. This is pretty obvious. Rav Huna amar shtut kepachot mishtut. So that's just repeating what we just said. Shtut is less than a sixth, is like less than. Hachi kamar, and this is how you should read the Mishnah. Pachot mishtut ushtut bichlal higio. Less than a sixth and up to and including a sixth. The deal is a deal, and nothing gets fixed. Yoter mishtut yinakeh. Only once you get beyond the shtut, then you start fixing. And then the way you would understand the words ad shtut would be up to, but not including, right? A sixth, meaning up to, meaning any percentage bigger than a shtut, but not at a sixth. Right? There's always is up to and including, or up to and not including. Rav Yehuda amal shtut ki yoter mishtut. So he says a sixth is like more than a sixth, where you would have to start figuring out the difference and fixing it. Hachi kamar. This is how you should read it. Pachot mishtut higio. Okay, so less than a shtut. It's just you have to leave it as is. Ad shtut ushtut bichlal yinakeh. Until a shtut including a sixth, meaning beyond a six and a six itself, yinakeh, you have to start fixing it up. Okay, so I did say we're going to spend the whole daf on this, but aren't we kind of done here, right? The whole, this side of the page, because, right, we're kind of done. Each one gave their opinion. This one read the Mishnah his way. That one read the Mishnah his way. What's left? Well, we're going to bring a difficulty on Rav Huna. It's going to be a little tricky because what we're going to bring is a source that in and of itself is a little hard to read, okay? And the Rashbam actually says that this is a Tosefta. So we're now going to read this source and see why this is a difficulty on Rav Huna. Let's go back to Rav Huna to remember who said what. Shtut is like less than a sixth. Okay, so Meitive. B'simanav u'b'mitzarav. The Tosefta starts out just like the Mishnah. If it had the simanim and all its demarcated boundaries, and you said, this is what I'm giving you. Pichet shtut o hotir shtut. Now notice this talks about specifically a sixth, and that's exactly what we're looking for. If you did any less or any more, then, if you gave the land ended up being a sixth less than what you promised, or a sixth more than what you promised, and specifically a sixth, notice, not more than a sixth, less than a sixth, it's that the land you gave was a sixth more than you should have, or a sixth less than you should have. Harehu kishum hadayani higio. It's a little hard to read, but it's like the assessment that the judges make, which we'll talk about in a minute what this is, and higio. Okay, now this word's hard to explain here right now. I'm just going to explain it literally. Higio means, we saw this before in our Mishnah, the deal is a deal. Now, that seems to actually, if you ignore the Shuma Dayanim line, it seems to actually match Rav Huna. So it's unclear why they're giving this as a question, because it actually says the deal right? The deal is a deal and it works, and that's it a sixth. And he said that. But they're ignoring the word higio right now, and they're saying the fact that it's like Shuma Dayanim creates a problem. Why? What is Shuma Dayanim? We actually learned this before. It's a Mishnah in Ketubot. Ha Shuma Dayanim dishtut kiyotir mishtutu. What they're going to point out is, in a minute, I'll read you the Mishnah. But what they're pointing out is, when it comes, if they're saying it's like Shuma Dayanim, for Shuma Dayanim, when they make an evaluation and they err in a sixth, it's a canceled deal. So What do you see here? Shtut is like more than shtut. Okay? So let's understand the Shuma Dayanim case. The situation is that we have orphans that inherited their father's estate. The father died. Orphans inherited. Now they owe money to the widow of the deceased, which could be their mother. It could be a different wife of their father. They owe her what? Mizonot. Remember, when a husband dies, he's supposed to give a ketubah. That's why this is in ketubot. If he doesn't give that one lump sum, right, until that point, or the estate doesn't pay, then they're supposed to pay monthly or whatever, an amount for food for her to eat. Now, they don't have any liquid cash. So what do? They have to sell the land of the father. How do they sell the land? They're orphans. They're young. So the court comes in and the court assesses. Shum is from the word shuma, an assessment. They make an assessment, what the value of the land is, and then they put it up for auction. And then people come and, but they basically first assess what the basic value of the land is. What if the court made a mistake and didn't assess the value of the land properly? So do we say that's canceled or not? So the Mishnah there reads like this, okay? And you might remember once I read it because it's a very famous Mishnah. We had it in a few cases. Shama dayanim shepichatu shtut o husifu shtut. So if they underestimated the amount, underevaluated it at the amount of a sixth less, or they evaluated it for a sixth more, micharan batel. It's canceled, the deal. Okay, so if the land was sold based on that incorrect assessment, the sale is invalid. What do you see here? This is already our problem. I'll read you the rest of the Mishnah just because it's a super interesting Mishnah for a different reason. But let's just stop here for a minute. This already proves our point. What do you see here? This is exactly at a sixth. And at exactly at a sixth, the sale is canceled. So that's the question against Rav Huna. If this Tosefta compares our halakha to Shuma Dayanim, then it should be at exactly a sixth. It should be like a bigger discrepancy than a sixth, rather than a smaller discrepancy. But the next line, that Mishnah, I'll just read anyway, even though, again, it's not really connected, but Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Mecharan Kayam. Shimon Gamliel says the sale is good. Why? Im ken ma koach beitin yafeh. You remember this? Because otherwise, people are going to start not taking the courts seriously. They're going to say, oh, the courts make mistakes all the time. And they're going to be what we call mizazel b'chvod beitim. They're going to say, we don't really care about the court. And they have this big machloket about, do we say, we can't just undermine the value of the court, even when the court makes a mistake, right? Which makes it a fascinating issue. And we saw this in other sugyot. Anyway, I'm going to leave that aside because that's really not our point for today. So now what happens? Well, if you remember, the Tosefta itself really didn't make any sense, though. So now let's go back and read it. I'm going back to the Meitivei. If you're exactly off by a sixth, if we stop the sentence there, you would say, it's like Shuma Dayanim, that it is six, it's canceled. So in this case, it wouldn't be canceled. It would just be, you'd have to, fix the difference and give back land or give extra land or give extra money. But then it says higio. That word makes no sense. Higio means the sale is actually fine, and we leave it as is. So that seems to contradict. So that's exactly what they're going to put in the words of Rav Huna, as if Rav Huna is there. Rav Huna is not there, but they're giving an answer. What would Rav Huna say to this contradiction? Amar lecha Rav Huna v'litamech, according to you, Rav Yehuda. In other words, as if Rav Yehuda and Rav Huna were there arguing about this. According to you, Rav Yehuda, how are you going to read this Tosefta? Because higio katane, it says that the deal is fine, and we leave it. So it doesn't, meaning this whole source doesn't make much sense. So how can we possibly read this? Ela kishum hadayanim v'lo kishum hadayanim. Rav Huna will read this as, it's like Shum Dayanim, but it's not completely like Shum Dayanim. In what way is it like Shum Dayanim? Because Shum Dayanim lishtut. It's like Shum Dayanim that if you have this case, b'simanav mitzarav, we're going to assume up until a certain point there's a margin of error. What's that going to be? Is it going to be 1/24th? Is it going to be 1/12th? Is it going to be 1/6? Oh, for that issue, we're going to go with Shum Dayanim. The cutoff is going to be at a 6, but it's below Shum Dayanim. But they're going to differ from Shuma Dayanim in this case because at exactly a sixth, it's actually going to be fine. In other words, when we talk about, is it a quarter? Is it a sixth? Is it a 1/24? Is it that we're going to compare to Shuma Dayani? But at exactly a sixth, no, that's different. At exactly a sixth, we're going to let this go. Beyond, once it's a bigger discrepancy than a sixth, then already we're going to say it's you have to fix it. Okay, so that's how Rav Huna resolves this problem. So it's not really such an issue. So that was all Amud Aleph, which was dealing with, number one, this case, Siman Av Mitzarav, learning that instead of 1/24th, it's 1/6 in this case, because you were much more specific and the person saw the field perhaps, or you said, take it as is. There's only a margin of error to a certain point, but it's a 6 and not a 24th, which is a big difference. Then we had the whole debate about it exactly a 6, though. What's the situation? Because the Mishnah clearly wasn't clear about what it would be at exactly a 6. And we had two possible ways of reading the Mishnah, which one really included the 6th or not. And when it said odd, did it mean odd up to and including or up to and not including? And then we just had one difficulty on Rav Huna, which in the end really turned out not, or at least we resolved the difficulty by pointing out that source as it is didn't make so much sense, and there must be a different way to read it. And that second reading worked better with Rav Huna. Now we're going to hear a story, and then we're going to move on to a different topic, which only vaguely relates to what we're talking about. Rav Papa Zavin Arameahu Gavra. So Rav Papa bought land from a certain person. Amar le, Havya Esrin Grive Mishche. Well, the person said when they were selling the field to Rav Papa, this field can grow 20 units of whatever. Okay, he gave him an amount. You can grow 20 units in this field. And presumably, from the continuation of the story, it seems pretty clear. He showed him the field. And Rav Papa knew that what we're going to see, Velo have ela chamesh. It really only could produce 15. You can only plant 15 units there and not 20. But it seems like from the continuation of the story, Rav Papa kind of knew that. Rav Papa knew that going in. Okay, so it's a little bit tricky here. We're going to have to figure it out because they don't exactly tell you all the details. But basically, someone sells him for 20, right? An area. Now, again, showed him the whole area, which is why we assume. Now, think about it. This is a big difference. It's a quarter difference, and not only that, but it's probably a noticeable difference. And that's why they probably will see that they assume that Rav Papa understood from the beginning that he wasn't going to be able to grow 15 units here, 20 units here. Because that's a big difference that would be noticeable. So according to what we learned, though, if it's b'simanav mitzarav and, kind of designated, we assume it is because that's why they're bringing it here. He showed him exactly, from here to there, this one I'm giving you, and it can grow 20. So comes Rav Papa and he's like, look, I got a quarter less, or maybe you could even call it a third, because 15 plus a third of 15 is 20. So maybe halachically we would call this a third. Okay, it's a big difference. So onto the Kamed Abaye, he goes before Abaye and he wants to get extra land or get money back from the person he bought it from. Amar le, savart v'kabel v'kibal. You knew going in what you were getting, and you paid the money anyway. And you knew from the beginning it wasn't going to grow 20. We have to figure out why did the person say 20? We'll get there. But you knew this. And if you know, then you agreed. So if you agreed to get taken advantage of and knowing full well what you're going into, maybe you were desperate for the land and therefore was agreeing to pay for it. So you can't actually get anything back. So this is different. Our Mishnah said you could get back if it's over a sixth of a difference, which this clearly was more than a sixth of a difference. A third is much greater than a sixth. But not if you knew exactly that wasn't the case, okay? And you knew the size. So now Rav Papa says back, right? He was a smart person, learned halakha, learned mishnayot, b'hatnan. Pachot mishtuti gio ad shtut yinaket. But what about our Mishnah? Our Mishnah says if it's a discrepancy bigger than a sixth, I get it back. And this is clearly bigger than a sixth of difference. To which Abaye answers, that's only if it's not clear and it wasn't obvious to you from the beginning. But where you clearly knew the situation from the beginning and agreed anyway, well, you agreed. So then we have this question. Rav Papa asked him, but he told me 20 and this can't produce 20. So what am I supposed to do with that? Amar le de adifa ke'esrim. you knew full well you couldn't plant 20 units. You knew it could only plant 15. Now, why did the seller say to you, you can plant 20? Because what the seller was saying to you is this land is such good quality land that it's like a field where you could plant 20. Okay, the word like was in teeny letters, right? You didn't read the small letters. Okay, and that's what he's basically saying. Okay, obviously it wasn't the case. There weren't small letters here, but you know what I mean? It's when and this is why did I say that? Because it's an advertising technique. It was a marketing. The person was trying to market their field when they sold it to you. And because they were trying to market their field, they said, oh, this is a great field. You can even plant 20. You didn't mean you could plant 20. You saw with your own eyes you couldn't plant 20. What he was saying is it's going to produce great quality fruits, right? You're better off with a smaller quality of fruits that are way better or produce, right? That the value of them will be like 20. And therefore, now here it's very interesting, right? Because basically Abaye rules here, and you have to think about what this means. Abaye rules that when you know going into something, right, that someone is marketing and what they're saying is really just a marketing technique, we don't take their words seriously because there's this combination of, number one, you knew going in exactly what it was. You saw with your own eyes. And if you didn't realize that it can't plant 20, I guess it's your fault, right? How he knew that Rav Papa realized this is a good question. Unclear. But it could be it just was so obvious. Because think about it. A difference of a 6, maybe you wouldn't notice with your eye, but a difference of a third, you would notice with your eyes, right? Or depending on whether you call this quarter or a third. But you would know the difference. And the second thing is, well, what about the wording the person uses? Well, we've learned this many times. If you can interpret their wording to mean something else, many people might use this wording, and it doesn't really mean it could grow 20, then basically you don't have a claim against him. And that's what Abaye ruled for Rav Papa. Okay, now we're moving on to a different topic, which we'll see. There's basically 2 cases of dividing up inheritance property, which is here really, you could say for 2 reasons. One more obvious, one a little less obvious, but I think also just as obvious, which is number one, we're going to get to a case where the distribution was done incorrectly, okay, like in our Mishnah, where you ended up giving too much or too little or something like that. But it's very different, and it's not an exact comparison, but it's somewhat similar. And the second thing is, on Daf Kuf Chet, which we'll get to in 2 days, we're already going to start the next section of Bava Batra, which is all about dividing up Nachalah. Okay, when you get inheritance property, who inherits who, we're going to get into all sorts of laws of inheritance. And often in the Gemara, there's this transitional type method where they'll start mentioning, we've seen this a lot at the end of Masechtot. Here we're at the end of a big section, right? We've been talking for the last number of chapters about laws of sales. And from here, we're going to go into laws of inheritance. So perhaps, I think that's a strong reason why they started bringing in inheritance sugyo to kind of transition in. So Tanya, we're going to start with a Braita, and then we're going to get to a Machloket Rav and Shmuel that doesn't exactly directly come from this Braita, but it's somewhat there, somewhat connected. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Ha'achim shachalku. When brothers divide inheritance, what do? We have the estate. We assess what the estate is. We divide it into 3, let's say it's 3 brothers. We divide it into 3 equal parts, or if there's a b'chor, but let's not get into the pishnaim of a b'chor right now. Let's just talk about dividing a property equally. And then we start deciding who gets what. So how do we decide that? Well, one of the methods they used was what we call a goral. And if you want to learn more about a goral, it's like a lottery. Shuli Mishkan's article this week just went up in flashback about goral, kalpi, which we're going to learn. The kalpi is the modern word for a ballot box, the way we vote in Israel. So anyway, it comes from, we'll see the word kalpi in our sugya. It's all about different kind of lottery and kalpi and the use of that word throughout time. So Rabbi Yossi says, if these brothers divided the land, so again, assess the land, then split it up into, let's say, 3, and then they do the goral. Okay, it doesn't exactly say how they did the goral, but they did some sort of lottery, maybe one, straws, and kevan sha'ala, right, and thank you, and apropos Yom Kippur, obviously, the goral for the 2 Seirim. That's where in Yom Kippur week. Thank you for pointing that out, Gita. Ha'achim shachaku, kevan sha'ala goral le'echad mehem, kanu kulam. and by the way, Shuli makes mention also of the Goral and Yom Kippur. So if you're not sure, you don't remember what I'm referring to, you can read the article also, it goes back to it. Now, since the Goral, once you do, let's say they pick straws, okay? One brother picked a straw that was representative of his section. As soon as he did that, kana kulam. There's a bit of a strange line. What this means is up for debate by the commentaries, but let's try to give it a simple explanation. Let's start with two brothers. If one brother gets the straw for one property, then it's as if they're both divided and everyone acquired theirs, and there's no changing, there's no going back. Now, this is the chidush, the uniqueness of this, or what this statement is trying to say is, even if you haven't gone and worked the land yet, you haven't gone and taken possession, there's no kinyan, no formal act of acquisition. The goral itself is like an act of acquisition, and it means it's the point of no return. As soon as one picked the goral, that is his. Done. There's no arguing about it anymore. And maybe they did this, instituted it so that brothers don't fight. You can imagine this is, unfortunately, a situation where many times you see people arguing and fighting. So once the goral is done, it's done. Now, what's tricky about this is, what if it's three brothers? Something doesn't really make sense. So once one of them picks a goral, so that means that, okay, this brother gets this piece, but the other brothers share the other two pieces. They haven't divided it yet. So how could you say kana kulam, all of them acquired, but the other two haven't acquired their portions yet? We don't know yet who's getting, right? There's a 2/3 left that's going to be divided in half between the two brothers that are left. So some people say kanu kulam means if there's more than two brothers, then what it means is the rest is jointly now owned by the brothers. Now, we still don't know who owns which part, but again, that first part can't go and be re-divided. That definitely belongs to that first brother. And now we'll go on from then, right? This portion definitely belongs to the two brothers, but there's still left to divide who gets which portion. There's other ways to interpret it, but the main point is that goral basically affects a kinyan, to which the Gemara says, my time. Well, what's the reason? Don't you need a kinyan, an act of acquiring? Well, Amar Rabbi Elazar, kitchilat Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Elazar says we're going to learn this from the way they inherited the property in the land of Israel. Matchila begoral, avkam begoral. Just like when they entered the land of Israel, how did they determine who was getting what? And it was not up for debate through a lottery system. So likewise here, we do it through a lottery system. Okay, we're basically going to say that sons inheriting land from their fathers, or if there's no sons, then daughters, we'll get to all that later, then, right, that's just like when the Jews inherited the land of Israel. So the Gemara says, but if you're really comparing it, here's that word I mentioned, if there it was all with a kalpi, okay, which can look better to see the exact definition of kalpi in Shuli's article, right? But they each got like a piece of paper or something. I mean, they didn't have paper in those days, but something like a piece of paper. And urim v'tumim, it was done through the urim v'tumim that were in the Mishkan. So, or right, the avkam bekalpi v'urim v'tumim. So maybe here you would need the same, which obviously doesn't exist, right? Maybe you could do a kalpi, but you can't do urim v'tumim. Okay, so the land was divided in a very specific way. So if we're going to learn it from there, you would have to do it in that way, where it was like a sort of magic. The urim v'tumim was always a little hard to understand, but it was this magic way where it would kind of come up, right? The choshem would light up one of the stones of which shevet, because there were 12 for each of the tribes, and it would light up when they got to, they would like take something from the kalpi, this section of land, and then it would light up on the urim v'tumim. So maybe you would have to do that here for it to be effective, meaning basically it's not effective because no one's dividing up inheritance with the urim v'tumim. We don't have it anymore. So and basically what they're saying is, if you're going to learn it from the nachala, then you would need all this to happen. If you're not going to learn it from the nachala, then you would need a kinyan. And in order for things to be definitive, there has to be some sort of effective kinyan, and there is none. So how does this work? Now, remember what kinyan means. Kinyan is showing seriousness of purpose. And there's different ways you could show seriousness of purpose, right? We have handkerchief, we have other methods. But sometimes if we do something, like here there was a goral, if we know that all the brothers really want this to happen, then they're willing to give up what's basically happening here. They're all equal partners, and each one has to kind of give up their rights to the other for there to be an effective kinyan that you can't, it's the point of no return. So comes Rav Ashi and he explains, Amar Rav Ashi, gamru umakne lahadade. It's in everyone's best interest, basically, to allow this to be effective, right? What brothers, I mean, sometimes you feel like they do want to be fighting, but what brothers really want to be fighting and pushing off when they're getting their land, right? You want your land so you can start planting and you can start using it and make money off of it. You don't want to be stuck in a year's worth of lawsuits and fighting and arbitration and mediation and to try to resolve this. So basically what they're saying is when one brother picks the goral, the other brothers are benefiting from the fact that this is finished and then they can acquire their piece. Then it's interesting, they say it like this, that they listen to each other. In other words, right? Everyone, it's in their best interest that each of them listen to the other so that they can basically divide and get their portion. And therefore, they're willing to relinquish their rights to that part of the field. And that's why as soon as the goral is done, it's like a done deal because all the brothers are happy. The first brother got his part already, and now they can move on and do the second, division or the third or the fourth. So that's the first part of the sugya about nachala. It's basically saying the goral determines that it's already a done deal. Now we move on to a machloket, and that was a Tanaitic source, and it was Rabbi Yossi's opinion. Now we're moving on to a machloket between Rav and Shmuel. Itmar. Shnei achim shechalku. So we have two brothers who divided. Okay, they did a goral, they divided, it's done. Brother A owns this part, brother B owns this, right? Reuven and Shimon, they're good. They're set. They each have their portion. Uba lahen ach mimedinat hayam. And all of a sudden, someone comes to the court and says, nice that Reuven and Shimon divided this property, but I'm a long-lost brother. And, the father traveled at some point, had a child with a different wife, and I'm the brother, and I get the nachala also. So now we have a problem because the land was already divided. Now, we said before, once you do the goral, it's done. So the question now becomes, do we undo it entirely, or do we come up with some other solution? So Rav Amal, batla machloket. Machloket here doesn't mean argument. Machloket means from the lashon of halukah, division. Right? That's what a machloket is. They're divided. But what it means here is whatever division was done is now canceled. Why? Because it was a mistake. They thought they were dividing it 50-50. It was supposed to be divided a third, a third, a third. Again, I'm just putting the issue of the firstborn aside. And it was a mistake. So basically, we start from scratch. Obviously, we're talking about where the brother was able to really prove that he's the brother. Otherwise, if he wants to get land out of them, the burden of proof is on him. But assuming he has good proof that he's a brother, so Rav says, all canceled. Shmuel Amal, mikamtzin. Shmuel says, we do something else. Now, it's unclear what this word mikamtzin means. It's unclear. There's a bunch of a machloket among the commentaries about what this means, but we'll go with the Rashban. What this means is each brother got 50%. So what does each brother do? Each brother takes a sixth of their property and gives it to the third brother. And then the brother ends up with a third. So what we do is you keep it. We don't say the whole division was no good. We just say, and this is why this is here, it's like our Mishnah. The sale is a good sale and you get the land. You just have to give back whatever's not yours. Okay, it's not really the same, but it's a similar concept. You just have to fix the problem. But what's done is done. So that's what we say here. That's Shmuel. So now we're going to have a question on Rav. We're going to resolve it. We're going to have a question on Shmuel, and we'll have to wait till tomorrow to see how we resolve that. Amar le Rava le Rav Nachman. Le Rav, so Rav says to Rav Nachman, I have a question on Rav. Le Rav de Amar batla machloket alma hadardina, right? From Rav who says the whole division is canceled. What do we see here? We basically cancel a judgment that was done. It was a judgment, right? It was divided properly. And now we have to go back and undo that. Elameata. So if we're going to say that that whole thing is canceled because it was done incorrectly or without, let's put it this way, because we're going to see a comparison. It's not exactly a true comparison, but I'm going to explain this situation as we're going to compare it. It was done without the third brother there, right? They divided a property that was owned by three and divided it without the third brother there. So when the third brother comes, we basically cancel the whole thing. So elameata. So from there, what shouldn't we say in a different case? That was a long, not such a long sentence, but a lot of words that mean a lot of things. There were beitzlata. There were three people, and they're missing some words here, who were partners. Okay, not brothers, but similar, right? Brothers in an estate are like three partners in a business. So 3 partners owned a business. What they do? Sorry, I read it wrong. There were 3 who were established together, who were basically in a partnership. And then 2 of them, Azle Beitre, 2 of them went and flug, and they went to the court and said, we want to break up this partnership and everybody take their third. And they went to the court, and the court divided. Okay, we're not talking just an amount of money. We're talking, let's say it was a big property. They divide the property into 3. But notice 1 brother's missing. That's how this is similar to the previous case. There was a division done without the brother. What did Rav say in the case of the brothers? It's no good, right? So, because the 3rd brother wasn't there when they divided it. So you're going to say because the 3rd brother wasn't there when they divided it, they have to redo the whole thing. Now, when the 2 partners, and this is why it's not really the same case, when the 2 partners went to divide the property, what did they do? They didn't divide it into 2, they divided it into 3. Everyone knew there was a 3rd partner. It's not like the brother. But what they're saying is, they're assuming that since it wasn't done with the brother there to have his say about anything, besides it wasn't divided even including that brother, but it's like 3 partners who 2 of them decide we're going to break up the partnership, and it gets divided without the 3rd one even being there. To which the Gemara said the obvious difference was this haki hashda. That's not the same. In the case of 3 partners, they divided it properly into 3 parts. Now, it's true the 3rd party had no say in which portion they got, which piece of land was going to be theirs, but still it was divided correctly, fairly, right? By the right, if the land was assessed, they each got exactly a 3rd. But when the 2 brothers got their portions, they each got 50%, ignoring entirely the 3rd brother. So that was done incorrectly, and therefore it goes back. Therefore, it gets totally undone because it was a complete mistake. That's Rav. Now let's go to Shmuel. Amalei Rav Papa Abaye. It's interesting. We have, right, Rav and Rav Nachman are asking about Rav. They're like they're later generation. That same generation, we have Rav Papa asking Abaye. Okay, we have these 2 discussions going on about something that was said by someone earlier. L'Shmuel de Amar Mekamtzin, l'Meimer de Kamdina. Now we're going to say, this seems like the opposite, and we're going to raise a problem with that. He says, it was done, right? Shmuel says, we leave them each with what they got. They just have to each deduct some from, right? Take some off of their portion and give it to the brother. So now that sounds like Kamdina. The judgment was established and it stays. It's fine. The Rav Shmuel, the Amrit Ravayu, interestingly, we're going to quote something we quoted in yesterday's stuff. Rav and Shmuel both agree. Now, this is a good example of when you learn a sugya, first just get the details of what we're going to learn, and then we'll figure out which part of it is relevant to our purposes. So let's stop in terms of our flow, and let's just understand the case, which we already understood because we reviewed it yesterday and learned it earlier in the Masechet, which is, Kor b'shloshim ani mocher lecha, echol achzor bo, ba'afilu b'se'ah achrona. So here we have a case where someone sold something to somebody else, and they said the words in the first case, I'm selling you 30 of these for 30 sla'im, right? So 30 se'ah for 30 sla'im. Kor is 30 se'ah. And what do we say? The deal is not final until the entire 30 is measured. This is viewed as one package deal. Okay, you complete it. It's good. Until you complete it, you can always change your mind. But if you add the words after Kor b'shloshim, you say se'ah b'sela, but each se'ah is worth 1 sela, which anyway is true, but you say it explicitly, that means that you view this as if it's 30 separate transactions, and as soon as you measure each se'ah, that is already acquired by the buyer, and then the buyer and the seller cannot renege on the deal. That's understanding the source. What does this have to do with our topic? Well, it's the first part that we're concerned with. Now, what happens basically? I'm the buyer, you're the seller, you're measuring out. I kind of have it in my possession, but, right, we don't view it in my possession yet. We don't view it as if I got it until we complete the entire measurement. But let's say it's my vessels, or, right, we had a whole question about that way back. But it's basically, theoretically, it sounds like it's in my possession, but what do we say? Both sides can renege. So what do you see here? Until it's done, it's not exactly the same, okay? But basically, until what the person got is not yet his until really it's done and completed. So in the case of the brothers, since they didn't really get the right amounts, it's not really theirs until it's completed. So when we find out there's a third brother, theoretically, we would think that Shmuel would say that it can be canceled, just like this Korban Shloshim can be canceled until it's completely done. So again, not exactly a clear comparison. It's a very different situation because the brothers actually got it. It was just a mistake. And the Korban, the Korban Shloshim, there was no mistake here. It's just saying it's not done until it's complete. But it's a somewhat similar thing, although we're going to see in the beginning of tomorrow's daf, which is, okay, it's really not similar, and that's why it's not a question on Shmuel. But they do raise this as a question on Shmuel because it does seem like things are not complete until they're done and done right, I guess you could say. And therefore, why wouldn't we just undo? And we'll see what Shmuel answers tomorrow. So what we do today, we started with Simanav Uv Mitzarav, which was a third case, not Midat B'Chevel, not Hin Chaser Hin Yeter, but you said Simanav Uv Mitzarav. We switch the difference to a 1 and 6. We debated, what about exactly at a 6, right? More than 6, less than a 6 we got, but what about exactly a 6 machloket, Rav Huna and Rav Nachman, Rav Huna and Rav Yehuda. Then we raised a question on Rav Huna, but resolved it. And then we had a case of Rav Papa, where we said, even though it should have maybe been this 1-6 difference, it wasn't because he knew exactly what he was getting. And that's kind of an exception to the rule. If you know for sure, and can establish the words of the seller as a marketing technique, then basically we can say tough luck because you accepted it, even if it's a much bigger difference than 1/6. And then we got to these two things about distributing property. First was the issue that Rabbi Yossi says about the goral. The goral for one brother already determines that's a done deal already. And then we learned that from the way they got the Nachala in Israel. And then we went to this machloket between the two brothers who distributed incorrectly because they didn't know they had a third brother. Do we undo the whole thing? Or do we say what's done was done and just each one needs to fix the problem by passing it on to the brother? And that was the similarity to the Mitzarav with Simanav, where the sale is done, it's just you have to fix. Okay, they don't compare it directly, but it seems to be linked to that. And with that, we'll finish for today. And we had a question on Rav, we resolved. Question on Shmuel, and we'll resolve that in tomorrow's shiur. Wishing everyone a good day.